Competing at the highest level in the NBA is very difficult, and it can take years to construct a roster built strongly enough to have a chance to win a championship. Hovering in the realm of mediocrity is a limbo zone no franchise wants to find themselves in, so oftentimes nowadays, if an organization feels like that's the path that they're headed towards, then they hit the reset button and begin to rebuild. Rebuilding teams need to establish a solid core of young players to build around and develop so that one day they can emerge as true contenders, and a lot of smart decision making between the lines is also imperative to the success of a rebuild. This brings us to the topic of today's video, where we will be going through every team currently in the rebuild phase and identifying the biggest bright spot about each of their situations. For clarity, the teams that I believe are in the rebuild phase right now are the Cavaliers, Pistons, Rockets, Timberwolves, Thunder, and Magic. Before we start though, it turns out about 64% of you watching right now aren't even subscribed to the channel, so please, if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, as not only does it help out a ton, but I would also very much appreciate it. Now with that being said, let's begin. We'll go through the teams in alphabetical order by city, so the first rebuilding team we'll discuss today is the Cleveland Cavaliers, and the biggest bright spot for them right now is the fact that they have a very promising young backcourt set in stone for the future with Darius Garland and Colin Sexton. Shot creation and playmaking is as valuable as ever in today's NBA, and when teams start from scratch, finding a worthwhile guard that can score efficiently at a high level is very difficult, and finding two of them is damn near impossible. The Suns went about 5 years with Devin Booker, struggling to find him a permanent running mate in the backcourt until they added Chris Paul this year, just for an example of how difficult it can be. And while I'm definitely not saying that either of them are as good as CP3, I am saying that they've been playing terrific basketball early on in their careers. Sexton's one of the most underrated scorers in the whole league right now, scoring about 24 points per game on 48% shooting from the field, and Garland is knocking down 40% of his threes this season, scoring about 17 points, and taking big strides as a passer and playmaker. The Cavs have a lot of good pieces in their foundation, and center Jarrett Allen was definitely also in consideration to be the pick here, but having a backcourt that plays well off of each other and produces at a high level this early on is definitely the brightest part of their rebuild to this point. Next up is the Detroit Pistons, and the brightest spot of their rebuild to this point is the fact that Jeremy Grant is easily living up to the big $60 million contract that he received this offseason. Admittedly, when the Pistons paid Grant an annual salary of $20 million per year for 3 years this summer, a lot of people, myself included, were a bit skeptical about the decision because prior to coming to Detroit, he was a defensive specialist and role player off of the bench for teams. Admittedly, he was a pretty damn good role player for the Nuggets teams that made deep playoff runs, but at the same time, the responsibilities of a number 1 or number 2 option are much different than anything he's had to experience previously, and to his credit, he's handled it masterfully. The most important part is that he's developed into a productive go-to guy while the team is still losing games this year, so their draft pick will still be able to potentially bring in another promising young prospect to develop. And as Grant is still just 27 years old, his time in Detroit will either be spent working towards getting another big contract elsewhere, or the Pistons process will be coming along nicely by then and they'll re-sign him to help lead them back into contention. But either way, the success of the signing has been a clear bright spot. The next team up is the Houston Rockets, and the biggest bright spot of their rebuild early on, seeing as it is their first year rebuilding so far, has been the Kevin Porter Jr. home run signing. When the Cavaliers released Porter Jr. earlier this year, because of a heated moment in the locker room, there was plenty of doubt about whether he was worth it or not. But he's come to Houston, he's put his head down, and he's worked incredibly hard to prove that he is worth the risk, and his production on the court is completely justifying that leap of faith in him. In his time in Houston this year, he's averaging about 16 points and 6 assists per game, and with his playmaking and passing ability far surpassing any expectations anyone had for him, and his ability to create his own offense, create space, and get to his spots, showing very promising signs for the future, he's looking like a good one without question. With Porter Jr. dating all the way back to college, there have been question marks about his attitude off the court, but with the way he's responded to this adversity, the talent is more than worth it, and after the Rockets were able to acquire him for essentially nothing, he's one of the biggest home run finds of the season. The next rebuilding team up is the Minnesota Timberwolves, and their biggest bright spot to move forward with is Anthony Edwards living up to the hype. Obviously, I could have gone with the cop-out answer and chose Karl Anthony Towns for being the clear best player on the team and face of the franchise, but when you get the #1 pick in a draft, there's a lot of pressure to take someone that's a big-time hit, and as the season has progressed, Edwards has looked more and more comfortable out on the court, and he's shown that he has the potential to, without question, be a big hit in the future. He's a confident scorer from all three levels, his explosive athleticism has been on full display over the last month or so, wowing every NBA fan out there, and most importantly, his efficiency has steadily improved over time. Obviously, the scoring efficiency still isn't great, making just 40% of his shots and 32% of his threes, but pretty much every rookie is inefficient when thrust into big roles like he has, and improvement does get made over time in that regard, and the fact that it's happened to him is a promising sign. Since the beginning of March, he's been scoring about 24 points per game, and his field goal percentage has risen to about 43%, which is closer to league average. He has the type of talent you want to see from #1 picks, and it was incredibly important for that to be the case, because the franchise probably couldn't have afforded to fumble a #1 pick. Next up is the Oklahoma City Thunder, and the biggest bright spot for their rebuild right now is the absolute treasure chest of draft picks that they've gathered for themselves over the next few years. Over the next 6 years, the Thunder own 34 draft picks, with 17 of them being first-round picks and 17 of them being second-round picks. That is an absolutely absurd number, and for a team that already has a pretty strong foundation of young talent with players like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Lou Dort, Moses Brown, and several others, that's a lot of opportunities to look to add to even more future contributors, or even better, future stars to build around. They can sit back and focus on developing the guys that they have now, and the best part is that they don't have to feel nervous about whiffing on a selection or two, because they have an insane amount of second chances available at their disposal in the form of draft capital. Plus, if things for the team start to progress sooner rather than later, they can use those picks to create trade packages for other quality players and fill out the roster with players ready to compete. So either way, it's a win-win for them, and the future looks very bright. And finally, the last rebuilding team we'll discuss today is the Orlando Magic, who just shifted towards a rebuild at this year's trade deadline, and their biggest bright spot at the moment is the fact that they have two very solid young two-way players under contract for a while in Markelle Fultz and Jonathan Isaac. Admittedly, because of how new the Magic are to the rebuild game, it was kind of difficult to pinpoint their exact brightest spot right now, and admittedly, this selection isn't the greatest because of the fact that both Fultz and Isaac are currently injured, but Fultz has started to emerge as a dynamic playmaker, and Isaac looked like a Defensive Player of the Year candidate the last time that he was on the court healthy. It's not perfect by any means, but it is a good start, and from here they have a long way to go. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below what you think about the way these teams are rebuilding right now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.